Good evening, everyone. I declare the meeting open at 6 p.m. I'd like to welcome you all to the council briefing this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge that tonight we meet on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. In terms of apologies and members on leave of absence, I do have an apology from Councillor Rosalind Harley, who is unwell. All other council members are here this evening. I'll just check with the CEO in relation to the Director of Development Services. Okay, they'll be on their way. So without further ado, we will go to public question time and receiving of public statements. So welcome members of the public gallery. This is your opportunity to come up to the microphone and speak on an item that is on tonight's agenda. We do ask that you state your name, your address and the item which you're speaking to this evening, and we do ask that you speak for no more than 3 minutes. So there is no particular order, so please do just come to the microphone as you wish. Yep, please come forward. Just over here. I'll now go to the CEO for declarations of interest.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I've received a number of disclosures of interest from council members this evening. The first is a disclosure of impartiality interest from Councillor Susan Gondaszewski on item 7.1, proposed leases to Department of Health. The extent of Councillor Gondaszewski's interest in this matter is that Councillor Gondaszewski is an employee of the Department of Health who operates and is the recommended lessee of the child health clinics referenced in the officer's report. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Gondaszewski's impartiality on the matter could be affected. Councillor Gondaszewski has declared that she will consider the matter on its merits at next week's council meeting and vote accordingly. The next disclosure I have received is a financial interest disclosure from Councillor Alex Castle on item 8.3, festivals and events sponsorship. Councillor Castle has advised that she has a financial relationship with Mount Hawthorn Hub, as she has provided graphic design services for the 2018 Mount Hawthorn Streets and Lanes Festival. Councillor Castle is not seeking any approval from Council to participate in the debate or remain in chambers when the matter is voted on by Council next week. On the same item 8.3, festivals and events sponsorship, I've also received a financial interest disclosure from Councillor Jimmy Murphy. The nature of Councillor Murphy's interest is that he's contracted by Mount Hawthorn Hub and Leederville Connect to assist in the delivery of their respective festivals. Councillor Murphy is also not seeking any approval from Council to participate in the debate or remain in chambers when the matter is voted upon by Council next week.
Thank you, CEO. We'll now go to the items and have an opportunity to ask questions of administration on each of the items on the agenda this evening. So the first item is 5.1, 101 Elmer Road, North Perth, proposed group dwelling. Is there any questions on this item, Councillor Gondaszewski?
Just in relation to the questions and items raised in the chamber, I'll just go through them. In relation to the merit of considering the district centre zoning in relation to the application, or how that was considered to be as part of the recommendation. There was talk of a sketch that hadn't been circulated, and also in relation to how or whether considering the height of this application could form a precedent for other development applications in future.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. I'll try and answer them in order if I can. In relation to the district centre, that area adjoins this site, and so the height permitted on that site is relevant context to the application. It's not the basis for the recommendation for approval, but it is relevant context, and I think it's something, well, it certainly is a factor that Council needs to have consideration of when determining the application. In relation to solar access, the development meets the deemed to comply standards of the R codes in relation to overshadowing, and so on that basis, because it meets the deemed to comply standards of the R codes, it is considered to comply with those requirements. And then finally, in relation to setting a precedent, the application has been assessed against the built form policy. Now it sets a two-storey height as a deemed to comply standard on this lot. However, as council members are aware, where an application doesn't meet the deemed to comply standards, council still needs to consider that application and assess it against the design principles set out in the R codes and the city's built form policy. That's what the assessment in the comment section of the report has done. Any application that comes in the future for 3 stories or any other height in an area such as this needs to be assessed in the same way, and that's what council's required to do under the R codes and under the scheme. And so a decision on this application won't set a precedent one way or the other, whatever that decision may be, because that process is a requirement and will be required to be followed, irrelevant of what the application is or whether there's been a previous decision made on a similar application, because each application needs to be assessed on its merits.
Just one further, just in relation to the tree that's referenced in the report and the Raglan Road property, are you aware if there's any protections on that tree? Is it a tree of significance, or is it just a tree that can be taken out and moved or cut down?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the tree could be removed or cut down. I'm not aware of any protections for that tree, similar to existing buildings or that context changing. So the context of the site could certainly change in a lot of ways without needing approval of council.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Just a couple of queries. On page 10, refers to a 940mm wide pillar for the letterbox, and then on page 13 refers to a 475mm letterbox. I just wanted to clarify how wide that pillar is for a visual truncation.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice and clarify why those two numbers are different.
And then the second one was, to my understanding, this is assessed under LPS 2. However, on page 11, under legal and policy, it refers to TPS 1. I just wanted to clarify if that was a typo.
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the legal and policy section needs to be updated to refer to LPS 2. LPS 2 is referred to throughout the report, and it has been assessed against LPS 2.
And just a final one on the district centre question. What is the current height of the developments along Fitzgerald Street that neighbour this property?
Through Mayor Cole, they range in height, but they're certainly not 6 stories, and they don't reflect what is set out in the built form policy. They reflect more closely what exists on Alma Road, 1 to 2 stories. Yep.
And is that a consideration in the assessment of this application?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that is a consideration. Absolutely. What exists there currently, in the same way as that tree, is a consideration. Yep.
Councillors, questions? Director, I have a question in relation to the overshadowing that falls to the adjoining property on Raglan Road. I know that you've talked about the overshadowing being compliant, but I'm wondering about the consideration being given to what the level of overshadowing would be if this was a 2-storey development which is deemed to comply versus the overshadowing at 3 stories. And I ask that question because it appears that the overshadowing is all to the rear yard of the adjoining property. So really the question is about, is that of greater impact on amenity at 3 stories than it would be at 2 stories, despite it being deemed to comply in terms of the amount of overshadowing?
Yes, through you, Mayor. We can certainly provide you with an analysis of those two, of the current scenario and the level of overshadowing versus a compliant 2-storey development with compliant setbacks.
Thank you. There was also some comments through the 5 objections that were received, and one talked about the fact that this is on high ground and that therefore had a even greater impact in terms of the site levels, can you make any comment about that? Do you want me to give you the other questions while I'm here, or would you prefer to answer that one first? Okay. The other questions that came through, the objections were in relation to the screening on the east side of the bedroom window, and the overlooking of the living area and the impact on 19A. If you could make any comment about the impacts there.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The site levels are deemed to comply, so they're not being raised significantly as a part of this development application. The site levels that were set as part of the subdivision process, and they fall outside now of this application because they've now been set as part of the WAPC subdivision process. So they're deemed to comply when we've assessed them against the R codes. In relation to the overshadowing assessment, that will show the overshadowing with the site levels as they exist and as they're proposed. So you'll get an accurate representation of the actual impact that will occur. In relation to the screening, or the overlooking, sorry, the screen that's been included on the plan is proposed to be, or it's proposed will stop the overlooking into that space, and so it was considered that that visual impact, overlooking impact, would be addressed through that screening.
And just going back to the questions from the public gallery tonight, there was just a general concern about the dominance and overwhelming nature of this development in the context of the existing two-storey and one-storey developments. Can you provide any comment in relation to bulk and scale of this development?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. The bulk and scale, well, the development itself does largely present as a two-storey development. It is 3 stories in height, but that third storey sits largely within the pitch of the roof, and so it does present as a 2-storey development in a lot of ways, though it is 3 stories in height. All of the developments on the opposite side of the right-of-way to the east are 2 stories in height, and so it's considered that this development will sit in with those existing developments. Though it will be slightly higher, it's not going to be significantly bulky in the context of that site in administration's view. There is a single-storey development to the south, and so there will be an impact to that side, but it is the 3-storey height is really just at the pitch, at the top point of that pitched roof, not all the way along. It's not a 3-storey box, so it will present 3 stories at that pitch, and it will be slightly bigger than the existing developments that sit in that location.
So from your perspective, I know that the permissible roof height is 9 metres and this is 10.1, so are you saying that the additional height is really, the effect of that is really just the 1.1 metres?
Yes, exactly. That additional 1.1 metres is overall what the overall increase is above and beyond what's set by the deemed to comply standards.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a question in relation to the landscaping, so page 27 of the agenda, and that's the canopy coverage diagram. At a rough guess, at least 50% of the canopy coverage either falls outside of the lot in question or is actually growing through the building. If you take the plantings on, that's the rooftop level, so if we leave, there's also a small amount of that on the ground level, but more so. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6 trees that are planted in a T-shape on the eastern side seem to be growing through the building, and given the size of the building, I would assume that at least 50% of that portion of canopy coverage would be impossible because it's not going to grow higher than the height of the building. And also, just in terms of the calculation, I know that 37% is greater than what we ask for, but also located on the southwestern corner, the large tree that's at ground level, which is the only one that's in true deep soil zone, seems to have about 40 to 50% of its canopy outside of the lot, which means that certainly the neighbours in the boundary to the south would be able to prune that legally with none of that being canopy with what's contained within their lot, and then to the west is the right-of-way. So can we just get some comments as to whether the canopy coverage at 37.29, what it would actually look like if you took away the section that was growing through buildings?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we can provide that too as part of the briefing notes. We haven't done that calculation to remove those portions that you refer to, and we'll provide some more information about the landscaping proposed at the same time.
Councillors, any further questions on 5.1? Okay, we'll move on to item 5.2, number 224 to 226 Sterling Street, Perth, change of use from office to educational establishment. Any questions on this item? I have one question, Director. Just in terms of the car parking calculation, talks about the fact that there's already a 6 approved shortfall, talks about that the car parking proposed is 3 car bays, 1 small car bay which isn't counted because it's not the compliant standard, bike parking times 5, but I'm wondering what is the actual deemed to comply car parking calculation for this building, and what is the actual shortfall? I'm happy for you to take that on notice.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, because it's an educational establishment, there's specifically no standard listed in the policy. It requires a parking management plan because every educational establishment is different. Some of them are classroom-based, some of them are student-based, some of them are training establishments like this where they have training courses as opposed to a set number of teachers or lecturers and students. So the parking policy, the city's non-residential parking policy, doesn't set a specific standard. It simply requires a parking management plan to be provided.
And are you satisfied that the amount of car bays provided plus the parking management plan will satisfy efficient use of in terms of access and parking?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, in the context of the existing shortfall on the site, I think, yes, there is adequate parking provided. There is parking provided for the staff and students through the management plan, or those attending the educational establishment, will either make their way through alternative forms of transport, which I think this development provides adequate facilities to support, or they will be able to park in the public parking available in the vicinity of the site. So I do think that there's adequate parking provided.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions on 5.2? Okay, 5.3, number 1 to 3 Blake Street, North Perth, extension to existing telecommunications tower. Councillor Loden.
I've got 2 questions. The first one was the one asked from the floor about why this extra height is required for the telecommunications tower. And the second one was just around the photos provided in the report. I got myself a bit confused around about which is the current situation, which is the future situation, and the photos are a bit pixelated. So I was wondering if we could get a clearer image of that so we can visualise what it looks like.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I've just had a look at the website version, and you're right, the images are pixelated and they can be corrected. I'm not sure how that's happened. The first image is the image of the existing tower. The second image is the image of the proposed changes or the proposed extension, which includes the removal of the antennas that are at the lower level of the existing tower, so at the 14-metre level. So the third, or the bottom tier basically, are removed, and there are a smaller number of antennas included at the top above the tower, so an extension in height. Now the rationale, well, the applicant's justification or reasoning for that proposal is to provide greater network coverage to existing users of the network. So the demand has increased, and they are in need of extending the coverage and the amount of coverage they have for that area. At the same time, they've proposed to replace their existing antennas, which already provide a service to that area. So they've removed those, replaced the service that was provided and extended the service at the same time with the additional antennas at the top.
Councillors? Director, I just wanted to clarify that this, in terms of the actual telecommunication tower, does it have permanent approval to operate at this site?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the tower's been in operation for over 15 years. The city, or the tower, would have been exempt from the need for approval prior to that. We don't have a record of it having approval, but then it wouldn't have required approval at the time that it was constructed. So our investigations to this point have led us to the conclusion that it was exempt at the time that it was built. It's difficult to determine exactly when it was installed. We've asked Optus and they can only tell us that it's been in operation for over 15 years. The aerial imagery post that isn't clear on exactly when it was installed, but the legislation certainly at that point allowed a tower such as this, well, not that exact tower, but a tower to be installed without the need for planning approval, and then the extensions to that tower subsequently also didn't need approval. So the original tower is actually a lot smaller than what's there now because it's been extended via the exemptions that exist under federal legislation over a number of years.
That's very interesting. So look, I just then have some questions about the fact that we're considering only the additional height as a planning item. But I do have questions about if there is a telecommunications tower that effectively grows over time, is at any point the city able to do an analysis of whether it still remains a low impact tower or whether it does, as the height increases and the service area increases, does that have any impact in terms of what impact that might have on the residential area? I note that there's a 4-storey development that's been approved next door, and can the city look at amenity and residential impact with the height extension and have some kind of understanding of whether that intensifies the tower in any way? Is that something that's able to be considered as part of this application?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to considering the tower itself, given the exemptions that existed for both the original tower and the subsequent extensions that have occurred, there's no ability to now consider the tower as a whole as it currently stands from a planning perspective. The extension that's proposed, though, is something that Council needs to consider. Obviously, as part of this application, the overall impact of that extension is certainly a valid consideration for Council to have, and whether this proposal, which both removes existing infrastructure and adds to the height, is an appropriate amenity outcome.
So in terms of amenity, we're talking about visual, but what about the operation of the tower itself and whether there's an intensification of signal, for example? Is that something that we could find out from the operator before next Tuesday's meeting?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we have spoken to the operator about the level of electromagnetic energy and the radio frequencies that will be emitted from the tower. They're covered by separate legislation and aren't a valid planning consideration in accordance with the state planning policy that's been set out. They're governed by the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, as well as the Australian Communication and Media Authority. So all of those levels are set through federal legislation, and I can go into detail around all of that and how they make those decisions, but it is governed by separate legislation.
So in terms of amenity, we're dealing with visual only for the purposes of this application. Okay, thank you. Any further questions on the tower? No? Okay. Item 5.4, 33 to 35 Mary Street, Highgate, additions and alterations of an existing 8 multiple dwelling development to a 7 multiple dwelling development and construction of 2 group dwellings, reconsideration of condition 8. Any questions on this item? No questions? Yes,
I did have one.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Just for clarity, I know it's contained in the report, but just confirming that had this development not gone ahead, each of the dwellings that existed prior to because it's effectively a refurbishment even though it's a new DA, each of those dwellings would have been able to apply for permits under our current system. Is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, that's correct.
And also just to clarify that the approval is just providing 3 additional permits, given that one group dwelling has taken one of the permits from one of the former multi-dwellings. So we're not considering permits for the whole development, just 3 2 for one group dwelling and 1 for the other group dwelling.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No. Item 5.5, 131 Coogee Street, Mount Hawthorn, proposed awning to a single house. Questions on this one? Councillor Toppelberg.
The officer recommendation, clause 1.1. Is that a valid reason for refusal, given that if they didn't put in a DA and removed it, we would have no ability to insist that they reinstate it?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that is a very similar reason to that issued by the SAT. The fact that a deemed to comply application would be exempt isn't a valid consideration and shouldn't affect whether or not that reason or a reason is included or not. So I do consider it to be a valid reason.
I'll just have to hand over to the CEO for a moment for a declaration of interest.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Council members, Councillor Dan Loden has disclosed an impartiality interest on this item. Item 5.5, the extent of Councillor Loden's interest in this matter is that he works in a volunteer capacity for the Australian Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, and the applicant recently made a donation to the foundation at the Mount Hawthorn Streets and Lanes Festival when Councillor Loden was running the AMDF stall. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Loden's impartiality on the matter could be affected. Councillor Loden has declared that he will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly when it is discussed at next week's council meeting.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Loden.
Thank you. A couple of queries. I received an email from the applicant, and I assume other councillors received the same email. The queries raised in that email were around they're proposing to replace their roof with a colour-bond roof. And if the roof was already replaced as a colour-bond roof, would the justification around making it consistent with the roof still be a valid basis for refusal?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I think the design is also a factor. I must say I haven't sat down and done an assessment of the proposal on the basis that the roof was colour-bond and was of the same material as what's proposed in this awning. So I would need to sit down and do a full assessment of that and present a recommendation. But it is one of the factors. Is the design of the bullnose awning is also a factor, not just the materials that are proposed.
There was a clarification that the current awning is 1,002 deep and 3.26 wide. And I think the report refers to 700 deep. And so the additional depth request is for an additional 700 mil.
Sorry, through Mayor Cole, I'm not following.
So in the report it refers to a depth of the existing awning of 700 mil, and the applicants said that they believe the awning to be 1,000 mil, and as such, rather than it being an additional metre, it is only an additional 700 mils onto the existing.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, we haven't gone out and measured the awning ourselves with a tape measure. We've used the existing plans for the house and our internal system to actually measure those plans and the awning. So it may be different on site, and we haven't measured that. We can certainly liaise with the applicant if we can contact them, because they are on leave, or they are away at the moment, to try and confirm exactly what the dimensions of the existing constructed awning are as opposed to what was in the building plans.
So they've also said that the awning will have to be removed as part of the existing approval for the carport, and so how that, if the awning has to be removed, they want to replace it with something, and how that would impact this decision.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, based on the plans that were approved previously, the awning may be affected slightly, but there's nothing requiring it to be removed. So it might need to be cut back slightly, but there's nothing requiring it to be removed completely. And so the applicant at the moment is required to simply cut back that awning to ensure that the roof of the proposed carport can sit where it's approved, but there's nothing requiring it to be removed completely.
And final question, just on page 110, it refers to one of the justifications is that the awning must not be more than 1 metre into the setback area and not more than 20%. And to my read of it, it is only 1 metre into the setback, so the basis for the refusal is that it is 41% of the width of the property, and if it was 20%, that would be okay. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the 20% is the trigger for it to not meet the deemed to comply standards, and is the reason why the application is being presented to council, essentially. But that level of variation and how it varies isn't a relevant consideration. The only thing that's relevant is that it requires approval and it needs to be assessed against the design principles of the proposed awning. So the level of variation, or how and the reason why it's different, isn't the consideration here. The consideration is the proposed awning against the design principles. But that is the trigger that has led to the application being required in the first place.
And so then it refers to a calculation around open space, but that's not relevant in this case. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given that this property has been the discussion of DAs with the city for probably 2.5 years, has there been any discussion with the applicant about the, shall we say, caravan-esque design of the awning, as opposed to perhaps something that is not necessarily brick and tile, but an alternative design treatment that perhaps sits better within the streetscape? So differing materials. I understand the intent is to be a lightweight design, but essentially it's a slightly bent bit of corrugated colour bond held up by two arms. Has there been any discussion of alternative designs to be able to achieve what they're trying to achieve but remain sympathetic to the streetscape?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, the full range of options has been discussed with the applicant, including changing the design, even slightly changing the design, through to what would be deemed to comply, what wouldn't be deemed to comply. So we have discussed and provided advice on a full range of issues. Given the design is one of the major issues, or the major issue now, that certainly has been discussed with the applicant, and they have been keen to pursue the design that has been put forward.
Director, I have a question about the report on page 9. It talks about the fact that the revised plans submitted for the approval consist of handwritten annotations made by the applicant, and it talks about the discrepancies originating from the handwritten changes, and it has 3 dot points there, that the site plan does not reference the awning, the roof plan does not align with the ground floor plan, the design of the awning on some elevations do not align with the measurement that has been handwritten onto elevation 2, And then it goes on to say, due to the applicant being overseas, the plans were not able to be amended and resubmitted with the correct details outlined above. Given that the recommendation for this application for DA development approval is for refusal, it was not considered inherent that consideration of this item was delayed on the premise of the quality of the plans. My question is that it always remains open to council to move an amendment or to put forward an alternative motion. Is that possible on the basis of what has been described as issue with the quality of the plans?
Yes,
and therefore does that limit council's ability to make an alternate decision to the one recommended by administration?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that has been considered, and it doesn't limit the council's ability to issue an alternative or to make a different decision. The plans and an approval of those plans could be conditioned to ensure that those, what are quite minor issues with the consistency of the plans, could be addressed by simply ensuring each of those plans was amended in a certain way to align with other plans or some other set of dimensions that council considered appropriate. So it doesn't limit council's decision-making ability. We were in a position where that issue was not addressed and picked up early enough in the process. By the time it was picked up, the applicant was overseas, and we considered it more appropriate to have the matter presented to council for consideration rather than to delay the process. In saying that, there's nothing stopping council from deferring the proposal to allow those plans to be updated so that council can consider a full set of plans. But we made the decision to present to council, given the timeframes and the history of this application, of this property and the number of applications we've had for this, to try and get a determination for the applicant within a reasonable timeframe.
Thank you. And the second question is, would it be possible to condition approval on the basis that the roof cover, or what should I call it, the roof material is changed to, because given that the applicant has said there's an intention to change the roof to colour bond, would it be possible to condition approval of the bull-nosed veranda based on the change of the roof material to matching colour bond?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, it would be possible to apply a condition requiring the roof to be replaced with colour bond. It would be quite a significant condition, but that is certainly a condition that council could impose.
On that basis, could I please request an alternate recommendation for approval on the basis that there is a condition requiring the roof material to be changed to colour bond, same material as what is proposed for the bull nose veranda? Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, a follow-up question in relation to the colour bond issue. If that was to be completed separately by the applicant, would they require a DA to simply change the roof material from tile to colour bond?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, they wouldn't require a development application.
So they could just go ahead and do that without any involvement. And my second question is, could you confirm what the approved material for the carport is? Is that colour bond, or is the plans I'm looking at say roof addition to match existing, which I believe is from the previous application? So how would this alternative motion affect that previous approval?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, it does say to match existing. So if the existing, when it's constructed, is tile, then it's tile. If the existing is colour bond, then it would be colour bond. So I think it's flexible enough from that perspective on the plans to allow an alternative such as this, as provided the colour bond happened all at the same time, to still be valid.
Councillors? Moving on to item 5.6, number 33A. Oh, sorry, that one has been withdrawn. My apologies. That's the item that has been withdrawn from this evening, which was Redfern Street. So we're moving on to item 5.7, Amendment 1 to Local Planning Scheme Number 2. Any questions? Director, I did have a question just in relation to the zoning on Fairfield Street. Just wanted to go to that issue because my recollection was that when council approved the zoning, we approved it, we sought to have that changed to R40, but I just wanted to clarify that was then reverted back to R60 by the Minister's decision. Is that correct?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, I think I'll hand to the Manager of Policy in place to outline the history of that situation.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, so yes, you're correct. When the Town Planning Scheme Number 2 was advertised in 2014, the properties along Fairfield Street were advertised as R60 code. When the item was presented of the scheme was presented back to council later in 2014 for council to consider all of the submissions that were received and then send it back to the state government for final approval, council resolved to abandon those advertised zoning changes along Fairfield Street and to change it from R60 to R40. That was sent through to the state government as the city's recommendation, but however the Minister, as part of the approval of Local Planning Scheme Number 2 more recently, directed the city to replace the R40 code for all of the remaining properties along Fairfield Street from R40 to R60. Unfortunately, there was just an administrative error with the numbering of number 50 Fairfield Street that meant the city, to comply with the Minister's requirements, wasn't able to recode that property. And so this proposal at the moment is to correct that administrative error.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Just a couple of procedural questions. So the consideration of what is a basic amendment and what is not, is that at our discretion? I understand that for this it would be unlikely it would be, but just in terms of the change in the regulations with the different categories of amendment, whose right is it to determine what is a basic amendment and what is not, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So there's specific requirements in the regulations that set out what is considered a basic, standard or complex amendment. In this instance, we have written confirmation from Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage that the content of this amendment is considered to be a basic amendment in this instance because it's correcting an administrative error. And not contained in the report, but I assume along with the change in the regs came an expected time frame? Traditionally, the reason why the change in the regs was brought in because it used to take 2 years plus to get any amendments through. Is there an expectation that this is a 3-month process, 3-week process, 6-month process? I know we haven't done one before, but what's the expectation for a basic amendment? Through you, Mayor Cole. So yes, the process for a basic amendment is a lot more streamlined than for a standard or complex amendment. Because the city is not required to formally advertise the proposal, that obviously saves a lot of time in the processing of it. There is still some statutory timeframes, and ultimately the timeframe is determined by when the state government makes the decision on the amendment. But I would estimate it to be all sort of gone through that process within a 3 to 6 month time frame, depending on specifics of how it goes through the process.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you. Moving to engineering items. First item for engineering is 6.1, review of engineering policies relating to verge treatments and street trees. Questions on this item? Councillor Loden.
Just a few questions on the tree policy, item 5, around the unauthorised tree planting and requiring approval. If someone wanted to plant a tree, it went ahead and planted a tree that was consistent with our tree matrix, wouldn't it be easier just to refer to that instead of requiring an approval process?
Yeah, so you may call. If Councillor Owen could point me to the page that he's specifically referring to, because my understanding is people don't necessarily...
183, Director.
183. Through your Mayor Cole, I mean, the simple answer is if somebody followed the street tree guidelines, then that would be fine, and that's the intent of the policy. If that doesn't read correctly, then we can certainly change that.
Then on section 9, which is page 185, the sort of opening sentence doesn't quite make sense. It says, may on an owner or occupier of land which abuts a verge may on a street tree located on the verge directly in front of his. It feels like there needs something to tidy up that sentence because it kind of gets lost in itself.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, we'll certainly look at the wording of that. It is a little bit wordy, so we'll review that. That's not a problem.
Then on the guidelines, it refers to trees must be spaced a minimum of 6 metres apart, just with crossovers being on opposing sides of a property. You might not have 6 metres but have the space to fit 2 trees. So I was wondering why it was a 6 metre spacing.
So yeah, Mayor Cole, I know that's our standard distance between trees. I mean, we do accept that sometimes trees, we can't achieve that, and trees are planted within the 6 metres. So, we do allow it, but that is our standard distance between trees, and it's for the health and the growth of the tree.
And then, I guess, a general question around both the verge and tree aspects around attachments and so forth. It's quite prescriptive in there, saying you can have a chair, you can have these certain things. What if somebody wants something that is like a block of wood that's not a chair, but effectively looks like a chair, or they want to put a bird feeder or hang a bird feeder from the tree? Is there a way we could word it to make it a bit less specific to provide that discretion for
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. I mean, the intent of the policy is to allow residents to do reasonable things on the verge. It is quite difficult to write a list, that covers everything that might occur. So we're definitely open to things that are unusual but are not stated in the policy. So I suppose the simple answer is we can look again at some sort of catch-all that will allow that.
So I guess on my read of it as it stands at the moment, if someone wants to put something on a verge that is not one of those things listed, it's prohibited. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
The CEO just wishes to make a comment.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We met this afternoon and worked through the provisions of the policy, and one of the things that I just want to alert council members to is that administration is going to be looking to cut out some of the red tape and complexity that's currently included in this draft of the policy, so that the intent shifts in terms of the street tree attachments and also the revised verge treatments away from the need to obtain approval, because that wasn't, from a originating perspective, that wasn't the approach that was sought to be taken. And as administration got more and more into it, it became a little bit more and more involved and complex. But we discussed this afternoon several ways that we can actually reverse the approach by specifying what are considered to be critical criteria. So they might include things like specifying the type of treatments that can be attached to trees or not, and saying that in a general sense, verge attachments are permitted to trees where they are safe, don't obstruct sight lines, don't interfere with vehicle or pedestrian traffic and those types of things. And then the city would actually reserve the right to ask adjoining property owners or persons who install those devices to amend or remove them if, in the city's opinion, those generic criteria weren't met. That would actually make administration and implementation of the revised policy provisions a great deal simpler for city officers, as well as potentially increase awareness and understanding of it in our community, as well as just general uptake. If community members wanted the freedom to go and do things, they could do so without firstly having to trawl through the policy to understand what it all means and how it all applies, and then secondly to contact administration to apply for approval or permission. If they wanted to get advice, by all means they could do so, but that was a discussion that only occurred this afternoon. But the Director and I have already discussed various ways that a more flexible approach can be included through the policy provisions, as said, for both street tree attachments as well as verge treatments. So the principle is, in essence, these things are okay, but the city reserves the right to ask you to change them or remove them if, in our opinion, any concerns are raised regarding other criteria.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Toppelberg and then Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just I have been in conversation with the Director, and so I just wanted to flag a couple of things that, depending on how the new draft looks, that I just may flag as an amendment. One is that in some of the preamble about the verge trees, that there's no real discussion of why. I think the council and the city has a fairly strong view as to why they are important and what value they provide to the community and to the streetscape. And I think that's a little bit that's missing. The Director has indicated that's potentially more appropriate in the greening plan, but I do think I'll wait and see what comes back with that. There's a lot of reference to adopted procedures, to applications or requiring approval, but then no indication as to what that process is. Whether that's a telephone call, an email, whether there's a form to fill in or otherwise. So just hoping that some of that will be clarified. But I will actually ask a question, because I did get a response late today from the Director, and I've only read it just before. So one of the stated council priorities for this financial year, or that is one of as part of our commitment to, or what does it fall under? Maybe, well, I'm not sure exactly what it falls under, but there is an objective to have a street tree planted at the front of each residential property. That's one of our stated objectives. And judging by the response, there are obviously differing views of property owners. Can I just get some clarity as to what right a property owner has to refuse to have a street tree planted? I understand issues of vandalism and otherwise that may occur, but what right does a property owner have to determine whether or not we can plant a tree in our verge?
Through you, Mayor Cole. The simple answer is that we can plant a tree if we wish on the verge. What happens in practical terms is that some people don't want a tree on their verge, and we find that they can get vandalised, etc. So we've adopted an approach where we don't force a tree on somebody if they really object to that tree being there on the verge. But we can impose that tree if we wish.
I think much of what else I had sent through is some of it's grammatical stuff, some of it's just intent, but we'll wait to see what comes back in the revised version.
Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Through to the Director. Firstly, in terms of the street tree policy, it refers to the tree selection tool, but that's not included as an attachment. Just wondering about where we're at with finalising that and whether that will be advertised separately or other form of consultation.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. That is a separate document, and we're very close to finalising that, so that'll be you'll see that shortly.
Keep going.
Got a few. And then in terms of the verge policy, on page 202, right at the top, it's got a note that refers readers to the policy. So it says, and I'm just wondering if it should maybe just refer to the clause rather than referring to the policy that you're already in.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I'm happy to review that and just check that the wording's correct.
Also, just there's the section on paving for cars, and we've got limits to hard stand in there. Just wondering if there's anything that prevents someone completely covering the entire verge with gravel and rocks, apart from the half metre around the verge tree.
Through you, Michael. Again, if I can take that question on notice. There are other policies like the crossover guidelines, so I just need to refer back to that to find a specific section. I believe there are limits on percentages of the verge, but rather than give you an incorrect answer, if I can take that on notice.
Probably also on notice, how many memorial plaques has the city got in footpaths?
Yeah, through you, Michael, if I can take that on notice, I'd appreciate it.
And last one, just can you comment on the suggested removal of 8.3 pensioners? Which was about where the city experiences difficulties in recovering the cost of construction of crossovers.
Through you, Michael, if I can take that on notice as well.
Councillor, just for the purpose of the meeting, as you're aware, I did put forward some questions via email, and they were really around the approval process required for the street trees, with my question being, could we actually reverse that and have guidelines where if the guidelines are met that approval is not required? So I note the CEO's comments in relation to that, and I thank you for reviewing that. Also had some questions around requirements like sleeves, whereas I thought that we could simply say, would it be possible to ensure that the tree health is maintained and that tree strangulation doesn't occur, rather than requiring specific sleeves or rope thicknesses. In relation to Christmas decorations and lights, I did ask the question whether Christmas could be removed so that it would simply say decorations and lights, and then that could go to deal with some of the issues that Councillor Loden has raised. Wouldn't quite cater for garden gnomes, but we can see how we could squeeze that in. And just in terms of clearances for both the tree policy and the verge treatments, I did ask a question about whether we needed to have a 2 metre clearance for the tree attachments, or whether we could simply make commentary around ensuring that they are safe and don't interfere with the footpath or the road. And in relation to the verge treatment policies, just a number of questions around some of the measurements required and whether we could simplify that and look at whether all of those were absolutely necessary, because it did seem to start becoming many measurements. So thank you very much for your offer to review the policy in light of some of the questions that you've received. Any further questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Sorry, just one, just that I've just thought about. In relation to section 1.3, where we talk about verge gardens, and it talks about turfing is permitted. Just to clarify that this doesn't this doesn't refer to AstroTurf. Yeah, sorry, or AstroTurf or some sort of other non-living turf.
Through you, Michael, that's correct. It is real turf, if that's the correct term, and we can look at the wording to make sure that's crystal clear.
Councillors. Okay, we'll move to item 6.2, proposed traffic management and safety improvement, Edinburgh Street, Mount Hawthorn. Questions? Councillor Loden.
Just wanted to clarify around the race plateau. So there was consultation with the community in the northern half there, and it was determined that the best option for that piece was to do a raised plateau. And then when we went through the consultation process, we found out that there was concerns raised and it was too noisy, so we're not recommending it. But there must have been other options that we considered to manage speed on that road. Is there an alternative option that we could be looking at or need to consider, given that it's actually the faster of the two portions of the street?
Through you, Michael. The first thing we looked at, which we thought was the best option, was to reverse the intersection so that people had to give way as they came down Edinburgh Street. But Main Roads wouldn't approve that, so that wasn't an option. We then moved to the raised plateau, which is something under our control. We don't need Main Roads approval for that, and that's what we consulted on with residents. If you look on, I think it's page 216, you'll see that residents supported a raised plateau. There were some people who were concerned about noise, but if you look, 26 people were in favour. I'm just reading it now, with 6 against. So we got broad support for the raised plateau in that location. The reason why we're not recommending to move forward, administrators not recommending that, is when you look at the data for the street, it shows that the road is behaving as you would expect. So there is no speeding issues and there are no traffic number issues. So it's behaving as it should. So bearing in mind the expense of a raised plateau versus the data, we're recommending that we don't move forward with that treatment. If I take that a little bit further, because I think you asked were there other options, there are other options, which is, and we didn't specifically consult on this, but you could consider the plateau as approval was the possibility of speed humps either side of the intersection at the top end of Edinburgh Street. So that is a feasible option at a much lower cost.
Councillor Loden.
So then just comparing the top end and the bottom end then is the primary driver for the speed bumps around the park because of that location of the park and kids accessing it and so forth then?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. The top half of the street, the bottom of the street, they perform all within the criteria, as I said, so there's no technical reason. But when you look at the amenity value at the bottom end, and you look at the emerging Safe Active Streets approach, then we thought as a low-cost option that it was reasonable to recommend that we move forward with that treatment, and you'll see that the public supported that overwhelmingly as well.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to the proposed plateau, there's mention in the report about some residents raising issues with the noise of buses going over those. Do you have any more details about that? Because there didn't seem to be any, I couldn't find any reflection of that in the report.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there's a summary of the consultation on page 219. What I can do, before we issue more information, is check the specific comments about noise that people made, in relation to the raised plateau, and be very specific about that.
And in relation to the alternative option, which is my recollection of our prior conversations with residents in this area, if we were to look at speed humps on either side of the intersection with Ellesmere Street, would you feel that we need to go back out for consultation with the residents on that proposal, or that perhaps the responses received would indicate a support for that alternative?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think you could consider that it's a similar treatment in a slightly different location. My suggestion would be that we would inform residents of the outcome, and just to make sure we didn't have any major objection to moving forward to speed humps if that was council's wish.
Director, I just had a question in relation to follow up on what Councillor Castle has just asked. Is it possible to identify for council members where the residents are that have an issue with the noise that they have concerns about for the plateau on the map? And also, would speed humps create less noise than the plateau?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. We can certainly identify on the map. That's pretty straightforward. And I can do that with the extra information. I think the noise profile will be similar. A car raises and goes up a speed hump and down. A similar thing with a plateau, but they would be in a slightly different location.
And could I also please request 2 alternates? One with approval of the recommending approval of the plateau, and one not an officer recommendation, obviously, and one for speed humps in place of the plateau.
Yes, we may call. We can certainly do that.
Thank you, Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Sorry, one further question. Couldn't we also assume that the cost of the alternative of 2 speed humps is similar to the cost at the other end of the street?
Yes, we may call. Absolutely, very similar cost.
Any further questions? Okay. Next item is 6.3, response to notice of motion, city building information. Questions? Oh, I did have one question, just in relation to Anzac Cottage in the list. It's listed as having relevance in that it's, can't remember how it's expressed, it's something about how it has interpretive historical value. I thought we should probably acknowledge that it's probably a little bit more historically significant than that, and that it's actually a significant historical, something like it's of significant historical value to the city of Vincent and to at least Western Australia, if not nationally. It's quite a unique Anzac monument. And I just thought that the characterisation of it in the table probably needed to be upped.
Yeah, through my call, we can do that. Obviously, we tried to summarise the information, but we can certainly do that. And I'll speak to you about some specific wording, if that's okay.
And just another question was really around how there's a lot of commentary in the report about how the city's not spending enough on its building stock to maintain or upgrade buildings, that there's a maintenance backlog, and that this could lead to significant financial burden on our community. I just thought that there was a tiny bit of commentary about how this council is dealing with a significant backlog over many, many years of historical, shall I say, neglect, and I just didn't feel that that came across strongly in the report. I just thought that might be something worthy of consideration.
Yeah, through you, McCall, we can certainly add some information about the specific actions that we've taken in the last few years to deal with that particular issue.
Thank you. Any further questions? Item 6.4, Draft Waste Strategy 2018 to 2023. Questions? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions, mostly focused around the table at the back of the strategy, which is page 240. Mostly it's around what's contained within these projects and trying to determine what, if there's the option to include some more specifics about what we considered under those projects. To my understanding, Project 1 will consider alternative bins and bin frequency collection as part of that overall assessment, not just specifically looking at organics collection. Is that correct?
Through you, McCall. Just a general point, you're not the first person to raise, I suppose, the request for a bit more detail about what specifically will be covered in the projects. So probably the best thing I can do is commit to doing that before the additional information goes out, to give you some more information. Certainly, yeah. One of the ways to intercept the organic stream, which is currently going into our waste bin and going to landfill, is a third bin, or even a third and a fourth bin, depending on how you collect garden and kitchen waste. And that is the appropriate time to look at the makeup of your bin system, I think, which will include the other bins as well. So if that's the simple answer to that.
Maybe just to make this simpler, so I guess the things that I'm interested to understand better is how each of the items that we've identified in that pie chart earlier on of textiles, medical and sanitary waste, household hazardous waste, the inerts like concrete and sand and so forth, where those waste streams will be considered for diversion to alternative things, which to my understanding would be under projects 6 and 5. And also is it possible to be more explicit about how we would be considering higher order waste minimisation strategies beyond just simply diversion from landfill to consider things like avoid, minimise and so forth. That is it possible to include that in there as well?
Yeah, through you, McCall, certainly we'll do that. We've already had some communication, so I know what you're driving at, and we can certainly do that before the weekend.
And then the last one was just around timeframes, and I recognise that you don't want to put timeframes into a strategy, but if it's not communicated in here, where would that timeframe be communicated to Council?
Through you, McCall, that's correct. The what flows from the strategy when it's approved is an action plan, and you'll have seen a draft action plan at the workshop. The intention is that those projects, which are specific actions under the projects, will be listed in the corporate business plan, and that's where you'll have a chance to see them, review them, and on an annual basis, obviously, we'll be handing projects in relation to the strategy.
Councillors. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, through the chair, just in regards to item 4.2 on page 8 of 12, page 236 of the agenda, it says here there is currently a modest 15% recovery rate with up to 650 tonnes disposed to landfill each year from this service. Is there any way of calculating the natural recycling process that the community embarks upon in the waste Verge collection every year?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I know what Councillor Murphy's talking about, because people come along and take that good furniture off the Verge. There's no way that we can measure that in a simple way, so we've not tried to do it, and what we're talking about recovering is what we collect, when we talk about that 15%.
50%, 100%.
Councillors, I'm not quite sure how to ask my questions without making statements, but I guess I wanted to ask about whether it might be possible to structure the document to reflect more of a strategy rather than what is potentially more of a discussion of what we're currently doing, with some fantastic objectives and some fantastic projects, but not with a lot of detail. Would it be possible to structure it more in a strategy format so that the community, when reading the document, could be taken on the journey of where we are, where we're going, what our objectives are, what our aims are, what key projects we're wanting to do, with a level of information that really helps the community imagine and visualise what those projects may look like? Question mark.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes. We've, it is difficult to put it in the form of a question, because I know we've already had a discussion about the flow of the document and does it tell the correct story. It's good to know that if council are, the key thing for us as administration, if the council are happy with the objectives and the approach and some of the things we're intending to do, then that gives us a good base to develop the document further. So we're certainly happy to take away and develop it. And you've already given us some examples of things that you think that the strategy could contain, so it's not difficult for us to do that.
What sort of time frame do you think you would need to do that? Like, is that a significant rework, and is that something that you would like to further discuss with council, or is that something that's going to be bashed together within a week?
Again, Michael, I think it would be difficult to commit to having it done in a week. We'd like to be able to do that, but I think that would be difficult. So we'd probably be looking at the next council cycle, and some conversations that maybe circulate in the document before we get to that stage again.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just further to the Director's comments, I think having regard to the feedback that we've received from council members this evening, we can have a look tomorrow at the likely level of effort that's required to add additional detailed timeframes, commitments, etc. to the draft strategy document. And if council members are comfortable, then based on our assessment tomorrow in more detail, it may well be that administration could withdraw this report from the current council agenda cycle so that we can recreate a draft document, distribute that for discussion with council members offline, and then finalise a draft document that can be presented to council at a subsequent meeting round that both administration and council members are very comfortable with, represents an aspirational document that's going to set the city on the right course for the next decade.
Councillors. Okay, thank you, CEO, and thank you, Director. Next item is, I'm not sure, is this a late item or has it been withdrawn? It's in relation to the Waste Strategy Summit 2018.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I noticed that It states that it's been withdrawn by administration. The intent was, or the description perhaps should have been that it's been withdrawn from the council briefing agenda. We're just putting some finishing touches to that and intend to distribute that to council members for consideration well in advance of the council meeting next week. So we expect to get that out in the next couple of days. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Corporate service items, number 7.1, leases to Department of Health to govern Department's current use of the child health clinics within the City of Vincent. Councillor Loden.
A couple of questions. First one was just around the utilities. Is that $7,000 that we have in across the 3 buildings, is that primarily electricity as a cost?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it is electricity and other utilities. I can get you a better breakdown, if you like, by the next meeting.
And I was wondering if we'd considered installing solar panels on any of those facilities at any point.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we do have a very small amount of money put into the budget for next year to look at solar facilities elsewhere within Vincent, but we haven't specifically looked at these at this point in time.
On page 246, when it talks about all the costs, we add in depreciation expense and then we subtract it out when we work out the total for all the clinics. So I was just wondering why we do that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the depreciation was added in firstly because we had the information available and it might be helpful to understand what the overarching costs of the facility is, and we wanted to keep them separate. When we looked at what the total subsidy would be by the city if this is adopted, we kept the depreciation in as being a true cost of providing the facility.
So we should read this as it's $34,000 in direct costs that we see coming out of the budget, but then an additional $20,000 in depreciation that occurs, that we should be putting that kind of money away to maintain those facilities and upgrade those facilities in the future?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. That does include the North Perth building, which of course that would be treated differently under this proposal. And I guess that was the reason for the focus of keeping depreciation in as a cost, is that is part of the hard cost to the city of continuing to lease the buildings to for these purposes.
And so then when we talk about the subsidy, I think I got a bit turned around in the numbers here, but there's a $23,000 subsidy effectively that across those 3 facilities that we're providing on an annual basis, and then in addition is the depreciation cost which we would see in requirements to upgrade those facilities in the future.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that does include the depreciation costs. So just if a back of the envelope calculation on that, it's probably around $40,000 including depreciation. I think we then take out, sorry, I was just doing this very quickly in my head before, but we then take out the $15,000 that would be paid in lease costs and a reduction in cleaning costs, and we would end up with around $23,000 as being the complete subsidy including depreciation.
And the final one was just around the North Perth facility. With that, us basically removing ourselves from the lease process, then where we wouldn't incur any costs going forward in the future for that asset. We're not a party to that in any way. Is that correct?
I understand that the lease, sorry through you, Mayor Cole, the lease would then be directly with the Department of Health, and so we would have to make good the premises beforehand, and that's built into the budget for next year.
Councillor Toppelberg and then Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. A few questions. The first question, can you explain to me, because your predecessor, I still couldn't get it, so can you just explain to me how a lease with an option that is then at the discretion of the lessor, how is that an option in a lease? Is it not effectively reapplying for a lease at the end of each 5-year term with your fingers crossed that the lessor is going to grant permission? Because my understanding is that an option means that when the option is exercised, the lessor doesn't get a say other than if the rent is set to market or otherwise in the calculation of the rent. But an option by nature is at the to the benefit of the lessee, is my understanding.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can review the terminology that's used. I take Councillor Toppelberg's point from a commercial lease arrangement. The perhaps more accurate description for when that is presented as being at the city's exclusive discretion might be a renewal option or an extension arrangement or something like that. So we can look to amend recommendation 2, because what is more important than the description option term is the actual term and the entitlement for that to be at council's discretion.
So I guess so then further to that, the question would be in relation to Highgate, whether a 475 square metre freehold property, whether the best use for the next 20 years of that property is necessarily as a child health service. It may be, just noting that may be better located elsewhere in the immediate proximity in other city. I understand the role of local councils traditionally in providing these premises, but looking 20 years forward, whether it's a significant landholding that may have other better use. But just in relation to the North Perth lease, and so my understanding, so there's a contract of sale which was conditional upon effectively 10 years and then a further 3 10-year options, where in round numbers 19 years into that, so nearly halfway through, but the actual lease that was written at the time was for 200 years effectively. If we are withdrawing effectively from this process, are we comfortable and confident that the leasing arrangement that is there would stand, that 99-year lease that exists there, whatever circumstances surrounded its original drafting, that will actually hold, and that the child health service at that location would be retained?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll have to investigate that a little further. I'm sure it's something that our property and leasing officer, Maluka, has perhaps also already looked at, as to whether or not that arrangement would survive any change that's being proposed. But we can include details that answer that question in the briefing notes.
Okay, and just in relation to the general comment, which says historically that, says on page 243, historically clinics have been located within local government-owned properties without a lease or tenure arrangement governing the use, and the general practice has been the relevant local government to repair and maintain the building, the department responsible internal fit-out and management. Is that something that the state or the department has made any commentary in terms of looking to formalise? Obviously we're doing what we're doing in Vincent, but is that something that they're looking to formalise going forward in some manner, or is there an expectation that local governments provide these premises? And the last question, which I don't think we'll have the information currently, but is it possible to get an idea of the number of people that use each of the facilities, so some idea of usage? Is it 20 families a month, 300 families a month, just getting some idea of what the actual usage is and whether these are in the best locations to provide the service that's required in Vincent?
So through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to the second question, there is some data on page 244 on use of the facilities. We may be able to get some further data that we've received that from the Health Department, so we can certainly look into that and see if we can get further data. In relation to the Department of Health's view on what their role is in providing child health clinics and how that works with local governments. As we understand it, they've been working with other local governments on a very similar basis to try and put these leases in place at around $5,000 a year. So that seems to be their sort of set lease payment that they feel comfortable with, but they've also articulated a number of benefits to the community for local governments to continue to maintain some involvement in providing the services. So it may change further down the track, but certainly this appears to be their best offer at this stage.
So, and just one further, in relation to North Perth, I understand the principle, given that we don't technically own the land, but given that there's an expectation for local government to provide the service, if the department can't reach agreement with the landowner, will the burden not then just fall back on the local government to find alternative premises and subsidise the cost elsewhere anyway?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we will look into that further. There probably is some more information on it. I just don't have it up at the moment, so we'll look into that further.
Just to highlight, my concern is if we say, well, it's not our building, so it's not our problem, if they end up not being able to reach agreement, there is a geographic gap in terms of the service being provided in that locality, which, my understanding, the expectation is that local government fills that gap and would then have to find alternative premises, and we'd be back with another report that looked much like the other three with a new location. So,
through you, Mayor Cole, we can give that some consideration because I think that's related to Councillor Toppelberg's earlier question. I would just say, though, that in the overall scheme of things, given our geographic size and extent, it would seem to me that we're fairly well represented by child health clinics as it is, and so it may well be that in the department's network, in the department's network of service provision, they may well decide, if that ever were to be the case, that the option might be that either they increase the service delivery through the other remaining service centres, or they, as you say, do look for another site to replace the one that might otherwise be lost.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Through you, Mayor, to Director of Corporate Services, can I just clarify that the leases result in the department having exclusive use of these premises for that period?
Through you, Mayor Cole, for that portion of the building, yes, that would be the case. There is some shared use of toilets, etc., that would be built into the leases.
And the permitted purpose as a child health clinic, that precludes any form of other clinical services being provided in those premises?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I understand that's the case, but I'll clarify that.
Director, can I just clarify that up until this point, and I know this is sort of in the report, but just for absolute clarification, that there has been no formalised agreement and that this is the first time that the Department of Health is making a financial contribution towards use of the city's building?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that is the case at the moment.
Okay, and in relation to the service provided, is it clear that it's a service provided in partnership with the City of Vincent? Is that something we could discuss with the Department of Health? That given that there's such a significant contribution from the City of Vincent, that this is not solely a Department of Health related service provision, given that there are significant costs borne by the City of Vincent? Is that something worth discussing with the Department of Health?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Certainly that's something we can. We've had fairly open and frank discussions with them so far, so very happy to raise that before the next meeting and provide some further information.
Any further questions? Okay. The next item is 7.2, authorisation of expenditure for the 1st to the 30th of April 2018. Questions? Okay. 7.3, investment report.
Sorry, I had a
question. Oh, sorry, you did?
Question.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
I was
Councillor
flicking through. I just had a couple of questions and happy for them to be taken on notice through you to the Director of Corporate Services. Just in relation to the $27,500 payment to WAM for the summer concerts for the project management at Hyde Park, I just wanted to get clarification as to the cost of that project in relation to other summer concert delivery that perhaps has been managed in-house. And I also noticed that there was a number of expenditure items that related to expenses that had been incurred at the delivery of, I think it was the Close the Gap Day, and a couple of others that maybe have been related to some other festivals. And I just wanted to get some information on when we're considering festivals and events, we generally look at so the sponsorship that the city may provide and then also perhaps in-kind support. And I guess I just wanted to get an estimation or get some actual costs associated with the delivery of the City of Vincent pop-ups or stalls at those events, just so I can sort of get an understanding of what we're spending versus perhaps what we're getting back from those activities. Because I know that there was some art installation and workshops and also canvas, etc., for Close the Gap. And I wasn't sure whether this was the way that we were reimbursing in relation to that event or whether this was our actual stall. And then I also noticed that there's a $35,000 cost for the ID population profile subscription fee, and I'm presuming that that's an annual cost, or I guess the question is that an annual cost? And do we have, and can I get a sense of what the usage of that particular program is like, as in, because my exposure to it has been fairly minimal, so...
just in terms of the director that wishes to take these questions, would it? Yes, Director of Community Engagement. So you would wish to speak on forecast ID at the end? Okay, I'll go to Director of Community Engagement first.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can certainly provide some information on the summer concerts and the role that WAM played this year and the cost implications compared to previous years. So I'll put that in the briefing notes. Just to clarify with Close the Gap Day, the expenditure that is in here is actually for Close the Gap Day initiatives that were delivered by the City of Vincent. So both some internal staff, morning tea, functions, as well as artwork within Keith Frame Reserve, which is separate to the festivals and event sponsorship that was provided to the Aboriginal Health Council for their Close the Gap Day festival. But again, I'll clarify the differences between the two in the briefing notes.
And through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to ID Forecast, it is an annual subscription fee. It is a well-used product by both administration when putting together and reviewing its understanding of its town centres, its businesses, its population growth, all of the statistics that, and all of our projections and estimates around population growth. It's also well utilised by businesses, real estate agents, those looking to do business in the city, those looking to move to the city. So it's a well-used product. It's and it's a budgeted ongoing subscription fee that's been included in the budget for a number of years.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Okay. We'll move to item 7.3, investment report as at 30th of April 2018. Any questions on this item? Okay. Late report financial statements as at 30th of April 2018. On this one? Financial reports? No. Okay, moving to community engagement. 8.1, seasonal licences for the use of Charles Verriard Pavilion, Modernians Hockey Club, Chewett Hill Cricket Club and the Mount Hawthorn Cardinals Junior Football Club. Questions? Councillor Loden.
A couple of questions. The first one, just in terms of the fee waiver, are these refunds that we'll pay back to them, or just offsets in the future that they won't have to pay, or are they no pay? They haven't paid this yet, and we're waiving it. I think it's a mixture of all of them. Is that right?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's fundamentally the difference between a write-off and a waiver. So those costs that have already been invoiced and therefore need to be waived effectively so that they are no longer payable, as opposed to those fees that need to be written off so that we know there are costs outstanding but they have not been yet invoiced to the clubs. And that is, you'll see a significant majority of the costs because the negotiations have been quite protracted, and therefore most of the costs were put on hold whilst we progressed through those negotiations, both myself and more recently with Mayor Cole's assistance.
On the topic of asset depreciation from before, are you able to provide details of what the expected asset depreciation is on that? I recognise this is a licence, not a lease, but they are the predominant users of it. What is the asset depreciation cost for the city on that?
Through Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice and include it in the briefing notes.
And I guess following on from your earlier comments, so this lease is currently acceptable to all those groups?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. So we've been negotiating for quite some time, and in recent weeks have got consensus from all three clubs that they're satisfied with the proposed terms. I will draw to council members' attention correspondence that was sent from the president of the Junior Football Club today, and that is seeking for costs to be reduced as much as possible, given the junior nature of that club. Administration is of the view that the waivers and write-offs that are proposed over the last few years are in recognition of the junior nature of the Mount Hawthorn Football Club, but certainly in relation to your question, yes, all three clubs are accepting of the terms that have been proposed.
And I guess on that topic, and I know the numbers are in the report, but I wasn't able to find it. I only just read the letter. The lease is, or the licence is for just over $2,000 for the Cardinals. And how many members do they have? So what would that, and then therefore what would that licence cost equate to per member?
Through Mayor Cole, the Cardinals have approximately 380 junior members, and the licence fee is proposed as $2,175. I'll leave those with iPhones in their hands to work out what that equates to.
Questions, council members? Councillor Gondaszewski.
Just in relation to the community lease and licence framework that's being prepared by administration, and just whether that would impact on the terms of the licence fees that may be paid by these clubs going forward.
Through you, Mayor Cole, certainly that framework may give greater recognition to junior sporting clubs and clubs with a high proportion of City of Vincent residents. Having said that, it is for that reason that we have only provided for a 2-year time frame within this particular licence. There are quite a few things happening in the public open space and sporting clubs space. That does include the lease and licence framework. So that is one of the main rationale behind keeping the term of this agreement quite short, so it is adaptable should that framework have any substantial changes.
Councillors. Director, I just have a question. What do the Cardinals currently pay the city in the way of fees and charges?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll get absolute clarity on this, but I'm certain that it's $0. They pay nothing at the moment for use of the Menzies club rooms, and because of their proportion of City of Vincent residents, their reserve hire fees are waived in accordance with council policy.
Thank you, Director. I'd like to also request an amendment be prepared to waive the licence fee for the Cardinals, which is the $2,175 plus GST amount. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Cole, I can prepare that.
Any further questions? Next item is 8.2, petition to exclude Brisbane Terrace, Perth from the new parking zone 7, permit parking policy number 3.9.3. Councillor Loden.
The report refers to that we're going to go back and review this again at some point in the future. Is there a proposed timeframe on when that review would happen?
Through you, Mayor Cole, what the approach we're looking to now take, particularly because this has been identified as a hotspot through the recent surveying that has been done, is really a case of ongoing ranger observations, which is something we're doing now with the appointment of dedicated parking rangers. Enables us to identify hotspots and then go back there on a scheduled and regular basis so we get an understanding of changes in trends. So the approach is for rangers to continue to focus on Brisbane Terrace, particularly between Fridays and Sundays, based on the data that we've received. And if any trends are visible and we think there's a need to review the current situation, we will do that. I've also been keeping the lead petitioner informed, and so she has been advised that if there are any differences or anything else that does emerge, that she can advise the city and we'll investigate that accordingly.
So just following up on that then, so in terms of a process, if the rangers are identifying that we're getting 100% occupancy, crossing over on those for this location, but then other locations across the city, then they have the ability to flag that within the organisation. That would then result in this investigation taking place.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. What rangers are now using as a guide is the parking occupancy matrix that was developed by Development Services through the North Perth Town Centre parking restrictions, which at least gives those benchmarks around at what occupancy should certain restrictions and should paid parking be considered. So that is the rule of thumb that rangers are now using. And a good example is another recent complaint or concern that was raised at Melrose Street in Leederville, where the initial ranger observations have identified that parking occupancy is quite often above 90%, and so that has been flagged as a potential issue and a potential need to change restrictions. So rangers have now commenced formalised parking occupancy serving similar to Brisbane Terrace, which will then be the basis, more than likely, bringing back a proposal to change the restrictions in Melrose Street.
Councillors, any further questions? No? Okay, we'll move to 8.3, 2018-19 Festivals and Events Sponsorship. We do have a couple of members with financial interest, so just wait for them to leave the chamber. Any questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
One is just to flag that I will have a chat to the Director of Community Engagement in relation to the Australianality proposal, but I will chat to him further, but just will flag that I may seek to amend or delete that proposal or the proposed sponsorship. Just a question in relation to the Leederville super criterion, which is proposed. So the commentary around it effectively says they don't engage with local businesses. There's little evidence of local support and local collaboration, and that closing the streets too many times may cause issues. Festival sponsorship aside, have we had any discussions with them about the potential for us to refuse street closure or to demand some of that local collaboration in order to make the event more inclusive? The reason I ask is that they have run the event previously without our support, and I guess if we refuse the sponsorship support without any other commentary, I'm assuming we'll get a DA somewhere in late December saying, can we close the streets in March? And if we say no in 6 months' time, it may cause some issues for their planning. So I'd just ask if we've had any further discussion with them around that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to business and more broadly community engagement, those conversations were held with the event organiser the last 2 years. And in relation to, I guess, the challenges with ongoing road closures in Leederville, I do know that the manager of marketing and communications has been having that conversation with the event organiser, partly opening up their thoughts to other potential locations throughout the city of Vincent that might be more appropriate, as effective but less disruptive on a town centre and a location with such close proximity to a freeway entry and exit. So it doesn't necessarily negate the ability for this event to take place within the city of Vincent. The administration just doesn't necessarily support it within the Leederville town centre, given the reasons identified in the report.
All right, so just further to that, do we, in the event that we proceed as recommended, which is to refuse the sponsorship request, does that mean that we would then liaise with them about the times and way in which they need to apply for road closures, etc., should they wish to pursue the event? I'm flagging it now just so that we're not having these conversations 6 weeks out from the event.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, a very valid point, and this is obviously just dealing with the sponsorship. It doesn't make any change to the way administration will deal with any event organiser looking to plan for an event, but traffic management and traffic closures is certainly something that administration has now got a keen eye on, particularly in town centres and particularly in Leederville, given that in recent years many event organisers have left those road closures very late in the piece. And indeed, for a couple of these events, we will look to stipulate within the grant agreement that road closures and the relevant approvals are received a minimum of X number of weeks or months prior to the event to avoid some of those event-related risks.
And just the last question, I will go back to the Australianality proposal. Okay, so that part is part of the confidential attachment. So the funds to, or the proposed funds to operate the event that are being sought from places other than Vincent, has any work happened on that thus far, or is the event's existence contingent upon us funding? And I understand what those other sources are proposed to be, but has anything happened in that space, or is that reliant on us saying here's $30,000 and then they may go and look for that, or is there evidence that there is other funding actively being sought currently and that we would be topping that up?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can confirm that other funding sources have already been confirmed, and so the event, my understanding is that the City of Vincent's contribution will still be an important part of this event happening, but they do have other funding sources and do already have those funds received, so they're not solely reliant upon the City's funding for the event to occur.
And the locations that are mentioned, is it solely within the City of Vincent, and in those locations, I know in the report it contains the Vincent locations, but is it planned to be elsewhere around the metro area or solely within the City of Vincent?
Through you, Mayor Cole, this particular exhibition is looking to be held in 2 locations. One is completely separate to the City of Vincent, but this particular exhibition during the November period is solely based within the City of Vincent and the newly formed West End Arts Precinct in particular.
Councillor Loden.
2 questions. First one was just around the amount. So in 2017 and 18, we funded it for $263,000, and this year we're proposing $319,000, which is a difference of $56,000, and we're taking $30,000 out of the summer concert series. So by my math, this is $26,000, but the report refers to $11,000 extra. So I just wanted to clarify what the difference was there.
Through you, Mayor Cole, you may recall during the budget process, outside of the sponsorship process itself, Council did allocate $15,000 to Leederville Connect for Fringe. So administration has included that additional $15,000 on top of the original $263,000, which is the difference.
And just because there is such a large number of events, is it possible to get, for the ones that we know the dates or approximate dates, like a calendar of the year to look at how it's spread across the year?
Through Mayor Cole, administration has already prepared that, so I'm happy to distribute that with the briefing notes.
Councillor Vitarka.
Similar to Councillor Toppelberg, I do have a number of queries about the application, the Australianality application. Can we get some details of who those other committed funders would be on the remainder of the funds sought? I noticed in their application they just referred to crowdfunding but didn't give acknowledgement through to any other sources. looking at the expected numbers of attendance, can we get an indication so we can maybe do an assessment on a per head value, because it is by contrast to other events that are held in the city, even the reduced amount that's coming from the offices of 30,000 are still regarded as very significant. And also looking at aspects of their costs and their budgeting. They do have a project management cost of just over $35,000 out of the $150,000 budget, and I'd like to know how that sits relative to other projects. It seems excessively high based on my experience on costs of run other events and the costs of events companies. So I'd like to actually see where that sits. There are, like I said, I do have some concerns that is quite excessive, and like Councillor Topperberg, I would like the opportunity to meet with the officers on this application as well.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we can seek that additional information from the applicant and include it in the briefing notes, and administration are more than happy to discuss that particular application with any council members.
Just following up on that, Director of Community Engagement, I note that the summary talks about local artists. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to find out which artists are from within the City of Vincent. And ticketed events, just to clarify, is the only free event the exhibition, and would all other events be ticketed for that program of events?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so the exhibition is free. The associated film program is taking place at Backlock, and that is a ticketed and charged event. There is also an artist's presentation aspect to the exhibition, which does have an entry fee associated with it as well. Administration has discussed with the event organiser what is included in their application, which is a family-focused open day, and that will also be a free aspect. So there's generally 4 different parts of the event. 2 of those are free and 2 of those are charged and ticketed.
Given that there's a fair amount of interest in this particular application, would it be possible for council members to have the full submission included with the briefing notes? Through Mayor Cole, yes. Having said that, what is the confidential attachment is what has been submitted by the applicant. Having said that, we do have quite a large amount of supplementary information that has been sought from them since the information was received, so it will be provided in the form of the current application plus supplementary information that administration has received. Thank you, Director. I also just had a question about whether Pet Fest will still be continuing. I noticed that they haven't sought any funding, and it was extremely popular last year, great turnout, and it was a really positive event. Is that still going to be taking place? Through you, Mayor Cole, we don't know. We did indeed make contact with all events who received sponsorship this year, and administration were also keen to see Pet Fest continue. Despite that contact, they didn't put a submission in, so I don't know whether they still propose to hold that event or not. Is it possible to find out? I just thought that was something that looked like it was becoming a regular. Would be interested to know if it's possible. We can certainly find out, but they haven't submitted a sponsorship application at this stage, but certainly happy to make contact with them again and just clarify where they're currently at. Thank you very much. And the other one was Close the Gap Day. I know that there was not a great turnout for that event, but the actual intent behind it is pretty great. Is that discontinued, or is that looking at an alternate location? Through you, Mayor Cole, the Aboriginal Health Council operated that particular event, so again we made contact with them. They've opted not to
deliver such a festival again this year. My understanding it is mainly due to the resource commitments it actually takes to organise a festival of that size, but we do now have a really strong relationship with the council, so we'll look to partner with them wherever possible to still get some positive outcomes and events from a reconciliation perspective.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions on... Yes, Councillor Vitarka?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's just with regards to the Leaderville Connect funding just for the Leedy Polluter. I know that they had actually, on the budget, we have divided into 4 events. Is that just a summary in this schedule, or is that total funding of $50,000 just going to go to the Leedy Polluter event?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that is just a summary, but to clarify that, we will just include within recommendation 1 under Leaderville Connect the 4 events as opposed to just Leedy Polluter for clarity.
Any further questions on festivals and event sponsorship? Councillor Vitarka.
Just further to the Pet Fest, and I know that that Councillor Gondaszewski raised this before with actually knowing the associated costs of running some of these events. If Pet Fest are looking to actually hold the event again in the city's boundaries, maybe we could look at an in-kind type participation and sponsorship with venue. Is that possible?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, when we do make contact with them again, we'll work out whether they still are looking to deliver the event. The positive thing with that is that it was delivered very much through support and sponsorship from others. Our sponsorship was actually quite marginal, so we may be able to support it through, as you say, in-kind support to enable the event to happen rather than a financial contribution.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Okay, we'll call back in Councillors Murphy and Castle. The next item, 9.1, will be a late report that will be released with the council meeting agenda. That's the Chief Executive Officer recruitment report. And just by way of update, the Chief Executive Officer recruitment panel met just prior to the meeting to finalise a recommendation to council, and the report is now, which is in draft form, will be finalised tomorrow and will be circulated with the council agenda, so that is underway. Item 9.2, information bulletin. Any questions on the information bulletin? Councillor Hallett.
Through you to the Director maybe of Engineering, just noticed that there was no UMAG minutes in there, and whether we need to chase them up.
Yeah, through you, McCall, I'll check that. That might be an oversight, so I'll sort that out tomorrow.
Any further questions on the info bulletin? Okay. That concludes the items on the agenda other than our confidential item. So we will have to cease our live transmitting of our council meeting. So we say good night to those who've tuned in.